Welcome everyone to today's live webinar on insights into ancestral healing. I'm going to do a prayer of gratitude and then a brief description for the new people of what is energy healing, and then a review of yesterday, at least the salient points, and then we'll dive into today's session. And as those of you who've been with me for a while know, usually the Friday night session, we lay down a lot of groundwork, and then the Saturday night session, we take off like rockets. So get ready, strap on your seatbelts, and we shall do this today. And lots of wonderful, brilliant questions have come in, even overnight, more questions. You know, some webinar topics seem to elicit more questions and others less. I've done webinars where not a single question came in. I've done webinars where dozens of questions come in. So anyway, lots of questions on today's webinar, which means I may be following a little bit of a guideline based on people's questions. All right, so that's what we're going to do. Let us begin. Thank you to the source of creation for being everything, for being all of us, for being all of our ancestors, for being the capacity of consciousness to heal, and for being the very blessed and precious bridge between the absolute and the whole manifest field of creation, the great tradition of knowledge. Thank you for our ability to work concisely and efficiently and in an orderly manner. Thank you for the ability or the blessing of today's session, that everybody in our session bumps up another level and has the opportunity to increase their ability, their capacity to leverage or harness the technologies of energy healing to promote the effects that we all want, the effects that we want in this world. Thank you. All right, what is energy healing? Energy healing, I don't think I did this yesterday. I don't think I gave a recap of what it is. I just dove right in. Anyway, yes, of course. So energy healing is the ability to focus attention. It's like a technology of using attention as the instrument of healing. Why attention? And why is attention somehow preferable to some other thing like maybe medications or procedures or something like that? It's not that one is better than the other. It's just that this is something that works. This is something that works. Why? Because everything that we know of as our physical body and our mental and emotional space around us and everything that we are is essentially comprised of consciousness. And what is attention? It's consciousness. Oh, everybody gets an A. It's consciousness. So consciousness folds in on its own creation and has an amazing innate capacity to promote positive transformation in the material field of self. Consciousness or awareness. And the cool thing about it is that as human beings, we are super experts at focusing our attention. Even newborn babies do it from day one. So we focus attention in an intelligent, intentional manner in order to bring that quality of source material, that quality of pure consciousness or awareness to the area that's suffering. And as that pure awareness goes into the area that's suffering, you could say it kind of like massages it. Just like if you feel like somebody's looking at you, and then you turn around and realize, oh, somebody's looking at me, because their attention is kind of like sort of physical, right? You feel it. So when you put your attention on yourself, then you can affect changes. You can affect transformations which are supportive of your highest health. So in energy, what I'm offering through these programs, through the webinars and everything else, is navigational tools, right? Like exactly where do I put my attention and how do I put my attention in order to get maximum effects, right? The technology of it. And also the support. The beauty of the live webinars is that we're together as a collective. And if one person puts their attention, you get a certain effect. But if a collective all puts their attention at once, you get a bigger, more pronounced effect. So no surprise there really, but we're leveraging that in the webinar. We're using that law of nature to really do some kind of good. And one of the reasons I feel that the webinars are essential for this process is because so very often individual problems or challenges have their roots or seeds in some area of collective imbalance, which is why we're doing a webinar on the ancestors, right? But it's also why so much of our work orients towards our work in these webinars as a collective towards solving world problems as well, because it's as if it's kind of like the fish in the ocean. You could say, okay, we're not living in water here, we're living in air, all of us humans and other creatures up here, trees and other beings, but we live in a kind of soup of consciousness, a kind of energy of the field I call the web of life. The web of life all around us that connects everybody to everything. So if you're living a happy, easygoing life in America somewhere, but somebody is suffering horribly in China, it means that no matter how nice your reality is in America, there's always going to be that little nag, that little nagging feeling like somebody's like really, really having a rough go in another area, and we're all breathing the same air and we're all part of the same soup. So very often what happens is, starting to tie into yesterday's session, the boundary between the description of what is energy healing and the review of yesterday is starting to get thin here. But there comes a point where the greatest meaning in life and the greatest joy of life is to be engaged in activities which are extremely nourishing and life-supporting for oneself and everybody. And that becomes the thing that's like the most wonderful, joyful, useful, productive thing you can do is something that's good for you and is good for everybody else too, right? So there comes a point, and we'll go back to the bell curve, which I talked about yesterday in the review. So on that note, let's just go ahead and move into the review. When I was reviewing in my own mind yesterday's session, I felt that the most significant thing that happened in yesterday's session happened at the beginning of the session. There was a healing that supported a reorientation of everybody in the group with their own ancestral field. And it also reoriented each member of the ancestral field with the whole field. So there was a kind of restructuring of the fundamental organization of family relationships, essentially. And what came of this was an improved ability for us to work with our own ancestry as team players, so that everybody is really supporting everybody else. And whatever those small aspects of personality or nature that might cause someone to try to thwart another person's efforts or act as a wrench in, in the machinery or something, you know, instead, all those little points in the field of individual relationship with ancestral relationship got smoothed out so that everyone works together. Everyone's on the same team. And the rules of teamwork are easy to follow. They're joyful to follow. They're comfortable. They're like going downstream. Feels like going downstream. It's like all you have to do is let go, and you're naturally doing that thing that helps everybody in your family. And when I say you, I don't just mean you, I mean like all your ancestors too, right? You ancestors out there. So everybody gets to just have that smooth, comfortable feeling of knowing that what they're doing is the best thing for themselves and the best thing for the collective. It was like a small shift, and the healing was very, very short, but it was significant. So anyway, I wanted to point that out because it may have gone zipping by right at the beginning, you might have missed it. The other point that came up, which I think was valuable to mention briefly is that I had talked before about how the three gunas arrange themselves in pairs. Always one side of the pair is Rajas guna, which is the sustainer or helps to perpetuate. And the other two are the creative energies and the dissolution energies, the creating and the destruction energies. So sometimes Rajas, which sustains, is together with the creating energies. And when it is, sometimes the creating energies are dominating and sometimes the sustaining energies are dominating. And when that energy is with tamas, or the destructive energies, sometimes the destructive energies are dominating and sometimes the sustaining energies are dominating. And that from these combinations, that's four combinations, right? Rajas with sattva dominating, Rajas with sattva less, Rajas with tamas dominating, Rajas with tamas less. Okay. But then what happens is these four combinations act as the foundation behind intention. They act as a foundation behind intention. And you heard me mention that in energy healing, we focus our attention intentionally, right? So intention is important. Intention is important. So what happens is there's a distribution of the way most people focus their attention that looks like a bell curve. So you get the least number of people that are like very, very self-destructive. They're destructive on themselves, they're destructive on others, they're destructive on the environment. And that's like the least number of people that have that destructive energy dominating, with the sustaining a little bit less. Because what happens is, of course, because the sustaining is less, people who live like that on the ongoing, they don't last very long. You know, if you're quite self-destructive, you self-destruct, and then that's the end of that. So unfortunately, right? So then there's the next layer up where the sustaining is a little bit more dominating, but the destructive energy is still there. And with those personalities, we get people who are very much out for themselves. They don't care who they hurt. They don't care who they roll over. They just climb as fast and hard as they can to what they see as some material gain that they're looking for, regardless of who gets hurt in the process. But this is like a bell curve, right? So the bulk of the people are in the middle, and they're really, you could say, very much mostly Rajasic energy, because it's just very little destructive, very little creative, but just mostly no going on. And that bulk of the people, and this is important, everybody, this includes not just us like human people in our bodies, but it includes all our ancestors who are in the spirit world as well, like everybody, all the beings. And that's a state which is actually quite good for processing your stuff and working through lessons. So in the human condition, this is it's kind of like the mean, or the center to which most people are kind of oriented toward, that central space where you're just getting along, you know, not trying to hurt anybody, not trying to be too much of anything, but just learn your lessons and get through your stuff and metabolize your experiences and like that, in a just kind of nice neutral way. Just a little download coming in right there, having to do with the nature of the human condition and the human reality, our world. I think when people talk about the world is going from 3D to 4D to 5D, something like that, you know, people talk about this raising the frequency or raising the dimensions. They're talking about a world that instead of is oriented mostly towards just getting by, right? Most people just get by. They work at Walmart. They go work at Walmart all day. They come home and they're just tired and they just watch TV and go to bed, right? Like, and it just kind of keeps going like that day after day. But just barely scraping, you know, by. But when it goes from 3D to 4D to 5D, what I'm understanding from my perspective is that the idea is that these these combinations that have the sattva increase. But people, it's kind of like a romanticized vision of how it's going to be. But the thing is, if we take the balance away from the center portion and we bring it more over into this area where sattva is combining with rajas, and that's where you get that first layer, mostly rajas, but still sattva, you get very creative people, right? People who are making and creating, and they're taking that, all that they've processed and all that they understand of themselves, and they're starting to put it out there in a way that people get it, you know, and it's always uplifting because the sattva is in there. And then at the other end of the bell curve, where you get people whose lives are just so devoted to the well-being of everybody. And one of the things I'd like to add with that, I'll come back to the 4D and 5D in just a second, is that if a person is mostly sustaining, say, you get like saints, you know, and like really great people who are kind of selfless, and they're just, their joy is to give to others like that. What will happen is if they start to get tired, or they get sick, or they start to fall down a little bit, they'll default back to the previous. Like in their quiet time, they're creating stuff, right? But if you have creative people and they get tired, then they default back to just sustaining, just processing. If you get people who are processing, if they default, they'll often default back to tamas, or tamasic side. Back to 4D and 5D. In order for the laws of nature to shift so that we can go into this finer area where the sattva and the tamas, or the sattva, is more present. It's not just balance. There's a balance, you know, if it's just mostly on rajas. Sustains, it's sustained. This world sustains. What happens is every time we try to squeeze into that higher level, it squeezes on both sides. So what you get are pockets. I remember Maharishi talked about this too. He said, what happens in the transition, in the phase transition of the consciousness of the world, is that you'll start to get pockets where there are pockets of purity, and then there are also pockets of negativity, and it'll start to like separate out into pockets. And then eventually the whole system will undergo a big complete transformation. But those who are kind of aiming, they're like, the transformation's coming, we're going into 5D, have to understand that the system is needs to stay balanced. It needs to stay balanced. And so if we expand that sustaining ability for our world to sustain itself, that means increased stability, flexibility, purification, integration, and growth, right? The 5 fundamentals of progress. In order for those to embrace the larger spectrum of that field, we're also dealing with more of the energies that break down as well. And you have to, because if it's only creative, then the world gets completely clogged up with too much stuff, right? It's like there has to be a purging. Remember, purification is one of those qualities. Some things have to go as well. So, but they don't have to go in a way which is toxic, you know, or painful. They can go in a way which supports evolution. And I think that's the idea, is that if the energy frequency rises, because on the sattvic side, there's more like a higher energy frequency. If the energy frequency rises, then the tamasic energies will take on a role which is life supporting. I'm thinking about it. Feels like a download sort of flushing through the system, our webinar collective. Anyway, that's a bit off from the topic of ancestors. So let's harness ourselves back in with the ancestors here. But thank you for being with me through that. All right. So, right. Oh, thank you. from one of our beautiful knowers of Vedic wisdom. She says, when sattva rises, tamas rises also, because nature likes to stay in balance. Absolutely. Absolutely. So going into 5D, 3D and 4D and 5D, I think the idea there is that it's done in such a way, with such grace, with such support from the flow of universal intelligence, that it happens in a way that allows us to do that without the whole place collapsing, you know? Okay. Interesting stuff. Questions? Oh, we've got questions coming in here. Okay, so yes, my beautiful. And here's from Croatia. She's saying, we don't want to be saved just a small group of people. We want heaven on earth for all. That's right. Oh, it's so sweet. What a beautiful sentiment, right? It's not like we just want, yes, and other people are raising their hand on that sentiment too. It's not like we just want like, a million people left on earth who are all the good ones. Like, we want heaven on earth for everyone. There's enough space. This is a big earth. There's enough space. And for all the beautiful, living, exquisite beings on earth, the diversity of nature's expression. So beautiful. All right. So one question just came in from Montreal, and it ties into another question, which I promised I would talk about today. And I just want to tell everybody that we did lay down most of the, fundamentals of energy healing for ancestors last night. So I hope if there are any gaps in today's session, you can go back and check yesterday's session for some of the basics. Like we talked about some of the laws of nature, of how imbalances pass from parents to children, and how the healing work is accomplished. One important point I probably should mention today is that we connect with our ancestors through our astral field. Just saying this, very simple, straightforward, through the astral field, because that's where the web of life is, right? That's where all the cords and threads of consciousness, that's where awareness is able to function as or act like a thread. And it goes in and it follows when you put your attention on the ancestral archive, that collective of your own ancestral reality. You're essentially putting your attention on your DNA. So awareness is going in both directions at the same time. It goes into the DNA. And so you know what your DNA feels like. It feels like your ancestral archive. But awareness is also going out to your larger body, your cosmic body, where the ancestors reside at that level that is common to all, because that astral body is that level which is common to all. Being is common to all, causal level is common to all, and astral level is common to all. So through the astral field, that means awareness settles down that far, we can pick up those threads and we can start to navigate our way through the field. And what we found is that the web of life is very big and it has lots of cords that connect everything to everything. But we can, as humans, this is actually a new insight. It's not specifically about ancestors, but it is an interesting insight, is that we can lift out of, not really out of, but we can, with our awareness or attention, we can isolate within the web of life subwebs. We can isolate subwebs. That means there is a web just for the ancestors. All the threads that connect you in any way to any of your ancestors make up a sort of web of itself. And it's big. It has that same kind of systemic structure as the whole web of life, but it's not all the threads. It's just the threads that connect to ancestors. And we can isolate those out with our awareness. We bring into the center of focus that region of our own causal field, our own causal body, which is responsible for all laws of nature having to do with ancestors. So that's the center focus. That, as the center focus, creates and here's causal body, deep, right? Creates a foundation for supporting a kind of like shining a light. Our awareness is like a light, right? So shining our little flashlight. Someone mentioned the word flashlight this morning. We shine it into the web of life and it lights up all those threads that are that connect us to our ancestors and connect the ancestors to each other. And we get something that's like a very grand matrix of threads that are all related to each other through the principle of ancestors. You can do this with anything, though. You can do it with any topic or any area. Like you could bring out all the threads that are related to, say, some art form. You know, if you wanted to do ceramics or something, there are a lot of laws of, there's a devata of that art form in the causal body. So you bring that devata into awareness, and then that forms a foundation for all the threads in the astral level that connect to all those different laws of nature and actions and structures associated with being able to align the thinking and the behavior and the thoughts and the feelings with producing something from clay. It's so simple, right? But anyway, all right, so this question is, since we do healing for our ancestors, and since time is non-linear in subtle fields of self, can we assume that we are receiving healings from our future descendants? Oh, that's such a beautiful question. So we can assume that the work that we're doing for our ancestors is also affecting our descendants. And yes, our descendants absolutely have an impact upon us. There's a lot that is not spoken of in our culture and our society about parenthood. Some people call it the world's best kept secret, because because there's so much you can say with words, but there's so much about it you can't say because it's just so subtle and so abstract. But yeah, absolutely, there's a great back and forth across the ages between ourselves and the ancestors. And there's a saying, or there's an understanding from Vedic science that says that if a person becomes awakened in this lifetime, that influence of their awakening touches ancestors going back in time and forward. I've heard lots of different numbers, but as I recall, I believe it was 10 in both directions. But I think that's what I heard Maharishi say. But we affect both directions at the same time, absolutely. I can give you an example. In our family, one of my children has just a phenomenal karma for wealth. And ever since she hit puberty, even though my husband's and my karma is kind of so-so, we have been comfortable. And every comfort that has come to us has come clearly as a byproduct of her presence on this earth. Like if you follow the thread, right? It goes back to that beautiful girl. So it's just one of those things. This question, though, it ties into another question, so I thought I'd read that one. So she's still grappling with the belief that all who pass return again, sometimes as soon as within a few years, and not necessarily into the same bloodlines. This has to do with the non-linearity, okay? So if we're healing specific individuals in our distant past family, they may be entirely different personalities now, yeah, living entirely different cultures, and had several new lifetimes already. Like, say we're working with our ancestors back 8 generations. Well, that ancestor 8 generations ago could have been through several lifetimes until the present, and of course that soul is still present in our world. Scattered. The mathematical possibilities of DNA differences through multi-generations and soul evolution boggles the mind. So perhaps generic ancestral healing, like cultural ancestors, healing racial and religious karma. Fascinating. So the principle here is that the soul is still present. So regardless of what the vehicle is doing, whether they're in a human vehicle at this time, or they're in the spirit world, or they've been through several other vehicles since then, the being is still there. And physically, what we're inheriting is what they were giving to us at the moment of conception. You know, what was that soul doing at the moment of conception? It's like that state of their being is what we actually inherit essentially. However, they don't stop evolving, and we don't stop evolving. And here's a cool law of nature that has to do with working at the subtler levels of creation. In the moment that your great-great-great-grandfather was conceived, in that moment, that whatever state of the great-great-great-great-great-grandparents was, they also can evolve from there. Like, in other words, just as we do healings for ourselves as children, right? Sometimes we go back and we heal some moment in childhood, or we can heal the ancestors even in the past can heal. There's transformation that takes place. This is what I find is quite mind-boggling about, is that the evolutionary transformation takes place completely all along the whole spectrum. So it's not just that from the moment of the conception, then they continued evolving like that. We can go back and heal them before the moment of conception, or a healing can be affected that supports them, or their own evolution further down the line can reflect back on them in the past and uplift their condition so that whatever their experience was in that moment becomes a higher level of experience as we go further on down the line of the evolutionary process. I hope that makes sense. It's very abstract. Oh, question.
Does it uplift their condition, or does it uplift the impression that remains of their condition? I mean, is there a whole nother version of life?
Thank you. The question is, does it uplift their condition, or does it uplift the impression of their condition? In other words, like, is there like a whole nother life? And the answer is, at least this is my experience through the energy healing process, is that it uplifts the impression of the condition. Because you can't go back and say, oh, well, the Holocaust didn't happen, because it did. So, you know, I mean, that would be very unrealistic to like say, oh, it just changed the event completely. But it absolutely changes the way we process the experience. And by changing the way we process the experience, this changes us epigenetically. It changes us down to the deepest level of our physiology. So even the very worst possible experiences that a person could have gone through can be restructured so that they support evolution. They support the evolution of that individual, and they support our evolution. Good question. Thank you. Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Okay, my beautifuls, 11:30. I'm feeling with the number of questions, we maybe better just keep rolling with questions a bit. I love that the questions are so rich, and so they're helping me bring out the information. So thank you. Oh, and also I wanted to make sure we did plenty of healings. So we can just take a moment. Let's take a moment. We'll scan through the group, scan through the ancestors, and see if we can pluck out or pick out any of those points in the ancestral archive where there's like the dirtiest room in the house, you know, where there's the most trauma or discord sitting in the system. So we'll just take a little look together with our great big flashlight of all of us together. We're just gonna focus in on the ancestral archive for a minute with the intention of, in the most gentle and natural and appropriate way, uplifting whatever is the deepest pain. Not by any surprise, I'm finding the seeds of the deepest discord. Associated with sort of misuse or misalignment with those tamasic energies. So often, when people do things that cause suffering in others, very, it's so common that that they don't even really know they're doing it. there's not really a lot of awareness there in so many cases. So that lack of awareness, it allows negativity to slip in. It allows negativity to slip in. And this, of course, ties into another really important question that came up. So I'm just going to go ahead and pull this question up while we're doing it. And so this, I'll read you the question, and then we'll go further into the healing. With our powerful healing collective, can we take a look at the virus of suicide? I call it virus purposely because I can feel the darkness somewhere in the field, like in the web of life. I can't quite grasp, trying to contaminate the collective here in the UK currently. And so then he brings up a point. There was a very famous celebrity person who committed suicide very recently in the UK, and the fallout from that event has created all kinds of, her tragic death has seemingly shocked the whole nation, with politicians even speaking of it. And on social media, it has many questioning, well, if life's not worth working, it's not working for her, what chance have I got, right? And it's not uncommon that something like that can spark a reaction in the collective, because that when people are popular like that, people are trying to emulate them anyway. And so if they do something like commit suicide, then people start to emulate, and it's no good. Question? No question. No. So mixed in with the grief is a lot of fear as well. People are afraid that it's going to set off a rash of suicides in the UK. And then he's mentioning that he has suicide in his ancestry, and the others in the group do too. And so it would be good to, and which is possibly why I can feel this energy trying to bring more energy into its cult. Can we please do a healing that will bring this dark virus into the light? Now, suicide is just one way that the energy that I'm noticing as I'm looking into the big ancestral field is one way that it manifests. It manifests in other ways too. But when you have a form like that, that is too difficult for an individual to deal with, it's overwhelmingly difficult. What it means is that it's sitting at such a deep, sitting down at that collective level of creation. So if you look at it and approach it from the surface, you're up here and you're little. And you look down at this thing and it looks big. And so if you try to go in, I'm like, okay, I'm that's Goliath and I'm Samson. I'm little, but I'm going to go get it, And you go in there with your rock in the sling. What you find is that it feeds off of negativity. So the little guy goes in there with his rock and sling, and then things just get worse. Things get real ugly at that point. However, we as humans have the gift and ability to locate ourselves anywhere along that spectrum of density. We can bring our awareness to source. When we stabilize our awareness in the source of creation, then who's bigger? We are bigger. So then we can focus our awareness in at those collective structures, and they're nothing by comparison, because nothing's bigger than being. Being is the biggest. And so, and when we're stabilized, we as humans, remember I said at the beginning, have this incredible innate ability to focus our attention wherever we want to focus it. So we want to focus it at the source of creation? Yeah, let's do that. I have a video on that. It has a scary title, 112 Ways to Experience the Source of Creation. Don't be frightened by the title. I'm not going to list all 112 ways. I'm just telling you the principles. those clickbait, those clickbait videos, like 3 best ways to skin an apple, things like whatever, people are like, oh yeah, 3, I can do 3, but 112 is like, oh, I don't want to do 112, too many ways. Anyway, it's not really a scary video, it just looks scary by the title. Anyway, maybe I'll change the title. The point is that The point is that we can start from the source of creation and then look at things. Then look at something that's big and ugly and scary and horrible. And when we do that, we can see it all. And what we see is what I described earlier, I laboriously described, how we can kind of exercise out a web within the web. Well, suicide is like that. It's and a lot of these other dark forms that have a kind of exploitative effect on humanity or on our energies are like that. They've created them, they've manifested as a kind of web within the web. You could say like a dark web or something, like the dark internet, you know, it's like a dark thing in there. So from the level of being, that's just a part of the web. And of course, we're bigger than the whole web. So nothing, that's nothing, it's nothing. But it's not nothing because it is an important thing we have to look at. For the ancestors, they didn't know that. The ancestors didn't even have a word for directly experiencing the source of creation. They didn't have a word. We've got like, they didn't have a word for it. They had the word God, but that kind of, at least in Christianity, meant something a little different, right? But we have many words for the source of creation, many words. And we have many ways, 112 ways to experience it. And so we're lucky that we are technologically savvy in this department. And we can add, as team players with our ancestry, we add our technological savvy to their beautiful qualities, their strength and stamina and qualities of heart and intelligence. There was double the amount of oxygen on Earth that there is now about, I think it was like 100 years ago or something. It's about half of what I know. And so you figure, well, that's how Michelangelo managed to make those amazing, you know, that's how all those guys back then managed to be so completely amazing, you know, Mozart in 32 years and all that stuff, you know, because they just had more oxygen to breathe. We're just kind of gasping for our resources here and there. They've got lots of rich resources. So, and guess what? When we share our technologies with them, they share their technologies with us. There is a way that the human body resonates, that at a very primordial level of our interaction with the web of life supports increased oxygen. Their bodies were naturally humming that way. They didn't think, hey, my body's humming in a way that supports increased oxygen on Earth compared to what it's going to be in 2020. No, they didn't have that thought. They just were that. They were just being that. They were just experiencing that. But we can look back and we can see, well, how was the human body functioning in a subtle way, in a subtle manner? Because, you know, everything we do, it affects everything, right? And particularly those states of being. So this is a sharing. This is a sharing at the egoic level of the being between ourselves and our ancestors, because ego is sense of self, right? So this is what how they perceive themselves, how they know themselves, what they know themselves to be. Not just on a gross level, like my name is this, and this is my job, and this is how many kids I have, and blah, blah, blah. No. Just sense of self, like in a primordial way, sense of self. And the common thread is the impulse of pure potential, because that's the thing that's the same from one generation to the next, regardless. So, pure potential, hum in the causal body, center of focus, pure potential. Resonating through the ancestral web at the astral level, communicating the truth about sense of self. Sense of self is pure potential, pure potential, pure potential. And what that pure potential is doing is it's going in and it's like massaging the meridians, the connections in this ancestral field to support a sharing of what is good between all the individuals the way their pure potential has manifested for them, that supports life, that sustains, right? With that rajasic energy to sustain. So the universe sustains. Our lineages sustain our physiologies. I came up with that idea, as you know, in the last webinar. I flipped that little chart up about the Rajas, Tamas, and Sattva. I've put it up here on my screen, but I've been thinking so very much about Rajas, even though Sattva is, the purity is held up and glorified, and everybody's like, oh yay, Sattva, Satchame Vijayate, truth alone triumphs, it's upheld as like this great thing. But I really feel that when it comes to energy healing, it's possible that that our ability to deeply understand and work with the quality of Rajas is possibly even more significant for supporting a transformation for ourselves and for our world, for our ancestors, which allows the Sattva to be more dominating, at least for the evolutionary process to be more dominating through the whole thing. Because the tamas and the sattva are more simple. They're more, in some ways, you can say they're limited because they're just on one side or the other side. They only engage 50% of the laws of nature, but Rajas interacts with all the laws of nature, the constructive and the destructive. Question?
That's like Vishnu.
Yes. Yes, I was actually thinking that, thank you. His point is it's like Vishnu, because Brahma is the creator, Shiva is the destroyer, and Vishnu is the maintainer. Yes. Yes, and that's why in Hinduism, Vishnu is kind of upheld. Of those three, Vishnu is most glorified. Vishnu comes to earth as Krishna and Rama and all those nice forms. Okay, we got to keep going. We're looking at that really, really, really dark energy that sits in the web of life. And I've mentioned it before, but brief overview here. As a collective, humanity became conscious that there is this misuse of tamasic energies. And the misuse of tamasic energies has given rise to a lot of negativity humans have experienced over the centuries. And so first we were trying to build a single hero, our one champion, and put him out in front of all that darkness and watch him get smashed. And so then we did that for several centuries. And then we thought, okay, that's not working. So then we it was sad, but they called them martyrs, and they glorified them. And of course, each one did something. Each one single enlightened person or awakened person who went out there and fought the darkness by themselves made some kind of great effect, but it wasn't enough, obviously, because negativity still reigns. Then we thought, okay, better to send a collective out in front of it. So we gathered up a generation and a half or a generation or so last century between First World War, Bolshevik Revolution, and Second World War, and we just threw a ton of people in front of that darkness and watched them get smashed. And so that didn't work either, because after the Second World War was over, there was still negativity. It made a difference. There was some difference, but it wasn't enough to get rid of all the negativity. Question?
Well, I was just going to comment, it's like putting all those people out into that energy field without any awareness.
Correct. Her point is that it was like putting all the people out into the energy field without any awareness. Good point. So that's what we're doing now, is the idea is everybody becomes a champion. The whole world. This is the raising of consciousness for the whole world. We all are awakened. We all are expressions of perfect divine embodiment. And then we address it from the subtle. Thank you. Beautiful. You anticipated. You're so good. So from the subtle, then we're looking at that darkness, and the darkness doesn't look that big. And that's what we're doing in our webinar as our collective. We have a big group here. We have hundreds of people on this webinar. So as our big group, settling down into the silence of being. Looking at that intensely dark, I would call it a misuse of tamasic energy, a misuse of the destructive laws of nature. And knowing as we're looking, as we're kind of gathering it in, it's easier to look at, isn't it? As a collective, I find it's easier. When I look at it by myself, I'm like, ooh. But then when we look at it as a collective, it's like, it's not that impossible. We're looking at it from the inside out, so it doesn't look so big. And we're looking at it with this reverent appreciation of its evolutionary potential. Because there's nothing in creation which is not evolving. Everything evolves. Everything evolves. Thank you to those, one second. Thank you to those individuals in this group whose job is to help people raise their consciousness. I know we've got folks in our group here who that's what they do all the time, because you are contributing your understanding of the laws of nature, of the evolution of consciousness to this, because that's essentially that's like the basic technology that's being applied to this very insidious, this energy which has been creating very dark, malevolent effects on Earth. And I feel as if we're getting into the heart. If you could say something that doesn't have a physical body has a heart, but it's like it has a brahmastan, it has a center. It has a center. We're getting into the center of it. And I'm seeing it with really well-established tentacles reaching into certain areas. This ties into another question too. Here's the question briefly. It's a quick question. Right now, there are over 1 million orphaned children in Venezuela and 6 million children orphaned in China. And who knows how many more in the refugee crisis. Please, can we do some healing for these children? So I see the tentacles going into these locations. There's certain locations on the earth where the suffering has been maximized. Venezuela, China, and England. There's things happening on our beautiful, the Earth's beautiful British Isles, which we adore with all our heart. So I'm just feeling, and any other places, the Middle East has long been under attack. Australia, we talked about Australia last time. The indigenous people of Australia, again, those children are under attack. So the children, and it's beautiful. This really ties in beautifully to yesterday's session, because at this time in our session yesterday, we were doing healings for our ancestors as children. And now I see in the non-linearness of our healing process, when we come to the same point in today's session, we find ourselves expanding that healing into the world's children. And noticing, as we've gone into the heart of this dark energy, of the brahmastan, of this structure, this dark web that's in the web of life, I can feel everyone's hearts resonating with just such a beautiful flow of purity, and compassion is like on the maximum. And I'm anchoring here on my physiology. One of my feet is anchored here to truth, because of course we always want to use truth in conjunction with the 4 legs of Dharma. Notice that once again, we are using the 4 legs of Dharma as our tools. 4 legs of Dharma: truth, compassion, orderliness, and the ability to let go and be unattached. So all 4 are engaged, and all 4 are, it's like this form in the web of life is receiving a download, but because it doesn't have a human physiology, I'll say, oh, you're getting a download, it's coming in through the top of your head. Well, this thing doesn't have like a top of its head like that. So it's not like, I can't say that, but I'm feeling it. I'm feeling as if we're giving a a spa treatment or something to this aspect of the web of life, which is has had very, very negative effects for our world and for our ancestors and everybody. And the ancestors are joining us. They are joining us with their resources of creativity and innovation and strength and knowledge of natural laws. Our ancestors lived much closer to nature than we do. And I'm still feeling the flow of this transformation is still going. So I shall describe to you as it goes. There's some part of the Vedas, and my Vedic scientists out there might know the exact passage or something, but it's in the Mahabharata, I think, where the sattvic, Devic forms of creation and the tamasic, destructive forms of creation have a big rope between them, like a tug of war, sort of, and they're pulling. And as they pull back and forth, it churns the ocean of consciousness. And as the ocean of consciousness churns, out of that churning comes many forms, including immortality, including Amrit Kalash, immortality. But this is what's happening, is that our collective, our healing collective, has harnessed through, oh, there it goes. Every time we get into a really juicy healing, my computer screen starts blinking. Okay, so because it's a lot of electromagnetic, it's stirring the electromagnetic field, as among other things, and so the computer gets, I better not say that too loud. We had computer problems last time, but anyway, I think we'll be fine. The stirring or the churning is going on, and one of the things that I notice in my physiology, so I'm just going to point it out to you, it starts, feels like there's a big heart activation, and the heart's going out to those million Chinese Venezuelan orphans and the 6 million Chinese orphans and so forth. But then there's also a little bit of an engagement with the third chakra, because the stabilization of the physiology takes place when we do this type of work that allows you to start to draw up more mojo, draw up more oomph behind the energy healing process. So right there, so we're just letting that come up. I'm checking in with that form that we found in last night's session that anchors down into the pelvis, which is also a kind of an ancestor spot on the physiology. And so that we can anchor in with the ancestors for that too, just to whatever degree they're able. I think most of them are kind of just witnessing our work, kind of going, ooh, right now. They're kind of sitting back, just kind of watching what's going on. It's kind of interesting. Okay. Anyway, I feel like the wave, the dance, the cosmic dance between ourselves and that darker energy is starting to come into its resolution point. It comes at there's some balance. I know some balance is created, some resolution is created, completion. As the completion is created, many completions are able to manifest at the gross material level. I will make one small comment on that, which I made yesterday that was so much fun to make. I shall make it again if I dare. Let's see if I open up. I'm going to show you a chart. And then I'm going to go to the other questions. Okay, here we are. So cool chart from a participant in Thailand. At our last webinar, we did a big healing for the coronavirus. The dates of that healing are here in red, right there. And then you notice 1, 2, 3, 4 days, and then the number. This chart, by the way, he pulled it off of the World Health Organization website, and it's charting or marking the decline, essentially here, of the number of infections per day of the coronavirus. And briefly, I guess this is kind of like a review of yesterday slightly, that the point was that behind the coronavirus, the outbreak was the cry from the hearts of the Chinese people for the atrocities that the government was committing on its citizens. And what the coronavirus has most effectively done is it has put a very swift and complete end to organ harvesting of political prisoners. Like nobody wants a liver from someone in China. Right? Oh no, they don't want their liver, they don't want their lung. Nope. So there you go. It's over. And as I mentioned yesterday, now of course, as I mentioned yesterday, I'm sure many people all over the earth are sending their love and compassion, saying prayers, and there could be prayer groups, and there could be I know there's a shaman circle that's working on it, which, you know, is also part of our collective too. We're connected all together with them. And so a lot of people are doing this work. The shaman collective came in about here, I think it was around one of these days in here. So it was starting to come down. But anyway, I just thought you'd be interested to see that, because it ties into the healing that we just did. This is important. We just did something on the level of consciousness alone. And we will see over the coming days and weeks how that directly affects some of these areas of intense suffering on our world, Earth. And we've done a lot of healings in these webinars, guys, but this one we just did was one of the longest, most sustained, most deep and intense healings I have ever seen our webinar do. So congratulations to everyone. That was huge. And I know, good for you. You guys are good. Good for everybody. Okay, questions, more questions. So we did this one. Oh yeah, we've got a whole slew of questions here. I did that one too. Get myself organized here. And I did that one yesterday, but I thought I might come back to it because it was super interesting and amazing. Yes, and I want to do that one too. Okay, so one question here is, can we do tarpanum for ancestors? For those of you who are not familiar with the word tarpanum, you can look it up on my knowledge base. But tarpanum is a kind of offering that takes place. It's like, tarpanum is a ritual. It's a ritual way of honoring the ancestor. It involves rice, sesame seeds, and water offered under the new moon, right? So you go out under the new moon with your rice, sesame seeds, and water, and like, for my ancestors. But it's done in India with priests, and some of the tarpanum are very, very elaborate, and they always select auspicious times, and they have specific Vedic texts that they chant at the same time, and so forth. So it can be a very elaborate thing as well. You can do it individually in a sort of simple way as a Westerner, or of course there's a more elaborated form of that. The ancestors like tarpanum. And what I do, what I've been doing for years with energy healing is using attention, right? We're using attention. I intend for tarpanum to be performed for my ancestors. At the causal level of creation, which is like that finest level, there are constant yagyas being performed. They never stop. So it's possible to bring awareness in, down, 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 down into the finest feeling level of creation, and find that region of the causal body which is responsible for ritual. It's responsible for all the yagyas and all the other rituals which are performed by indigenous people all over the world for centuries upon centuries, all those. And in that space, just have the intention for tarpanum to be offered to my ancestors. And the beauty of engaging with these subtle yagyas, and a yagya is another name for ritual, it's a Vedic term for ritual. The reason for doing that, the beauty of it is those rituals are done with to a higher degree of potency and perfection. For instance, in a yagya that's performed by a person at a specific time, they can only offer as many flowers as they can stuff in the room with them. But down at that level, you could offer all the flowers on earth, or all the fruits on earth. You see what I'm saying? Like there's a potential at the subtle level to upgrade the potency of the yagya. The other thing being that the consciousness, the aspects of our consciousness which are responsible for the performance of these rituals, at that level, are in a very high state of perfection. So they're going to be performing the rituals without having eaten something prior that maybe disagreed with them, or without, you know, having gotten some bad news about their mother or something before, you know. So it's possible for that to happen in a way which is very pure. There is something to be said. Now, the whole purpose of ritual, and I think at some point we should probably move and explore ritual a little bit, because it's a very, you know, it's a very interesting, it's a very full area of topic of exploration. But one of the values from a human perspective is that when we do something with the intention of it being ritualistic, we're aligning from the gross material level all the way in to the finest level of our being, so that every fiber of the self is engaged in that process. And I feel that there's a level of potency with that also, which is different from the level of potency that you get when the yagas are being performed at the subtle level. What we're doing in energy healing is when we, as humans in our physical human bodies, bring our attention to the yagas that are being performed at the subtle level, we add that physical material element to a certain degree. As I mentioned last time, wherever we focus our attention, our soma flows. So those intelligences at the subtle level of creation, responsible for those subtle yagas going on, are fed by our attention, and it enhances the potency and the meaningfulness of their work. Because if I go to my subtle field, to my causal body, to the area of ritual, and I say, with the intention, I want to do a yagya, you know, for my paternal grandfather, for example. I want to do a yagya for my paternal grandfather. Then all of a sudden, that adds a layer of meaning to that yagya that's going on there, because the yagya has been recognized by the surface, so the soma is flowing, and I'm adding a bit of an angle in there as well that helps the yagya to take a particular direction, and that it can flow in that direction as long as it needs to until a resolution is completed, and then it goes back into its more settled state. I hope that makes sense. Anyway, enjoy that. So yes, Tarpanam. Okay, another question. Ancestral karma versus past life karma. How are they related? Okay, so sometimes we are our ancestors. So sometimes it's the same karma. And it's, as I mentioned last night, it's not uncommon for a soul to reincarnate over and over in the same ancestral lines, because there's something about that DNA which is I should say, interfaces harmoniously with that soul to support their maximum evolution. And I also mentioned that with regards to earth energies, right? That there are certain places on earth that have certain frequencies of life force that are very conducive to supporting our evolution. So as a soul, even returning in body after body, we sometimes return to the same locations over and over again. Even if you can't get there physically, return in your dream state. We spend a lot of time, I don't know if you guys knew this, but we all spend a lot of time in our dream state exploring places. We explore places because there's a lot of interesting places. Anyway, they all have different flavors, you know? Okay, another question. Does the web of karma, okay, how are they related? So this ties into the other question, whose name I will not say, because I'm keeping everybody anonymous, but her question about it being, oh gosh, I should be more organized here, guys. It's not that one. It's not that one. It must be over here somewhere. Anyway, her question was about how it's so sort of mind-boggling when you've got ancestors who've incarnated in other bodies, and the whole thing becomes like this really big field of karma, right? And it's true, like sometimes we're going back and doing healing for an ancestor, and it turns out that they're carrying something from their ancestors, but they're like a pivotal point for our physiology, something like that. So ultimately, what we're doing in energy healing is we're looking for the seed. We're looking for the seed of the imbalance. The way we tell the difference between this imbalance, the seed of this imbalance comes from my past life versus the seed of this imbalance comes from my ancestors. The way I tell it, or the way I make that distinction, is based on the energy signatures in the threads. So getting used to feeling those threads. Each thread is like a life form in itself. It has a personality. It has qualities unique unto it. So if I've got a symptom at the surface and I start going back and I start digging for that seed, and I find as I'm digging back, I start to get impressions and sensations and feelings associated with that seed or that imbalance. And some of the impressions and associations or impressions and feelings and so forth they feel like my ancestral archive. And I mean, part of the story here is just letting your attention be with these different parts. Get to know yourself. It's like our bodies, right? When we cultivate certain skills with our hands. Some people are piano players, right? Other people they carve wood, or they cook delicious food. When you cook delicious food, you start to cultivate your physiology in a way to be sensitive to textures and smells and taste, of course, obviously, and temperature, very subtle. There are people who specialize in tea in the Orient, and they're extremely sensitive to the temperature of the tea. They can tell the difference between 1 degree, from 1 degree to the next of that tea. It's just the right temperature. So there are things like that we cultivate just by putting our attention in that area. So getting used to playing, like playing in the ocean, playing in the web of life, and experiencing our own astral body, we start to get used to how the different threads have different feels in them. And some of those threads have the feeling of the ancestral archive. Everybody's DNA has a certain feel to it, has a certain nature to it, and it's different. It's like the designs on the pads of your fingers. Everyone's a little different, and so yours is unique to you, and it's good to know it. And there's a video that I have online about body scanning, and you can look at that video, because that's a great time and a great way, there's a technology there, a great way to access those deeper layers of self and to start to explore through the energy field of oneself. Know yourself first. Okay, so there's a field that's related to past lives. There's a field that's related to ancestors. Both are accessible through the web of life, but they have different feels to them. They have different feels. The feel of the past lives is always a very familiar feeling of myself, but like sort of at a lesser state of evolution. Right? Myself, but kind of like a smaller version of myself, or at least a less evolved version of myself. It's lovely to bump into that, because as soon as you bump into that, you start uplifting it. Okay, let's see, where was I? I was messing with my questions here, my papers, and I lost my paper. Okay. Does the web of karma reside in the web of life, the level of the astral body? I think we actually already answered that, didn't we? Yeah, web of karma. We've been working with it. Okay, is this the realm of Jaimini's karma mimamsa, analysis of action? Oh, I came to that question, I'm like, oh, that's quite the question. At the moment, I was like, oh, I'm not sure. I never asked myself that question. Which here, do you see how I appreciate this? Because I'm encouraging you to send your awareness in places you've never looked before, to ask yourself the questions you never asked before. But he's asking me a question I never asked before. I love karma mimamsa, by the way. It always made sense to me. I don't know why. I'm not even sure how, but it just did, Yeah, right. It's good stuff, man. But what I would say about karma mimamsa is it comes from the mist. Karma mimamsa is him. It's ultimately, that's where I see him when I check back in with Jaimini, like, where's Jaimini? Where's that aspect of my own consciousness, which is Jaimini, at that collective level of being? I find him manifesting his sutras from the mist. For those of you not familiar, The mist, remember our diagram from physical up here all the way down to subtle? The mist is in the gap between the causal and astral levels. That's that level where the Karma Mimamsa Sutras of Jaimini come. Okay, one more question. Can we get some insight from Jaimini on healing ancestral karma and making the ancestors happy? Ooh, that's a great question. And I'm looking at my clock. Oh, and we're at the end of our, oh, and some really good questions came in here too in my boxes. So here's what happened. I didn't get to answer all the questions, you guys. And even though I started quite early, well, at the beginning of the session, I started answering questions, but that just means, thank you for, number one, thank you for sending your questions in on the question and answer box, because when you do that, Zoom saves them for me. So I get to go back and review them. And I will review all of them. And sometimes I make a video after the webinar that answers all the extra questions. And if I'm able to do that, put that together, I will shoot it out to everybody here on the webinar. And if I'm not, I'll find another way to address them. Maybe YouTube video, maybe I can send emails to people, something like that, because there's a lot of really good, I mean, when you guys ask questions, man, they go woo deep in. So I love that, and I'm grateful. And I'm grateful for everyone being with me. And we just didn't have enough time today. We'll have to do longer webinars or something more often or something, or do this topic again. This was a good topic, surprisingly good topic. So thank you, everyone, for being with me. Thank you all. Much love to everybody. Looking forward to seeing you all soon.